signal is still present. Yes, so the signal is still present in the EMG. And I'm showing you here an example of our stroke subject. So here you see 3 segments of activities, high activities, corresponding to an opening gesture, and they're interspersed with relaxes in between. And we're trying to use essentially this to control the device. But intuitiveness is not the only factor. The more important factor is active engagement. And this is to say that recovery is better if you actually use the impaired limb, if you try to exercise the impaired limb. And for stroke people, there's really very little incentive to use the impaired limb because it's very hard to use. But if you use EMG as a control method, then they're forced to engage the muscles and perform exercise, which helps them to recover. So it's kind of the classic UCL lucid situation. So once again, what do we want? We're trying to turn EMG into an intent, the intended gesture, and use it to control the device. And as it turns out, this is a difficult problem in 2 ways. So the first being that everybody is spelled different. Even on healthy population, the signals can vary drastically, right? So people have different body mass, muscle mass, body fat, hair, and also it changes when you do go to a different position, when you place the sensor slightly differently, when you're fatigued, all of that comes into account. And on stroke, the difference is even wider due to the nature of their injury and how they recover. So the best way for me to show you this is to show you some sensor plots, right? So this is the same sequence as before, where the person is going from relax to open and then back to relax a few times. And as you can see, if you compare visually even, if you look at the signals collected mid-session compared to end of the session compared to a different posture, it's quite different. So classical methods such as thresholding or some frequency analysis will not work here. And we're really trying to lean towards the more learning aspect of things. And the other challenge is that if you involve learning into the equation, data becomes a big problem. So we often say that robotic data is very scarce. If that's the case, then I think I could confidently say that EMG data is non-existent, right? Even compared to pi zero, we are at a very, very small scale in terms of data. And that's just because it's very hard to collect EMG data. For healthy, it's slightly easier. For stroke, usually you have to go to the hospital. You have to have a OT, occupational therapist, in place to facilitate everything to make sure nobody gets hurt. So it's very hard to scale up data collection. So in this small data regime, if we want to train a model, we really have to be very efficient with our data. And that being said, given how much data we have, how non-stationary EMG can be, what's the best approach here? And we decided to go with a pre-trained fine-tuning approach. Typically, you find this in vision and NLP is very common. But in our case, our pre-training population is healthy and our fine-tuning population is stroke. This might make sense, straight off the bat, but I'm sure, OTs will disagree with me strongly because we all know that healthy and stroke EMG are very different. And as you will see very, very soon later in the talk, if you try to use a healthy pre-trained model that's trained only on healthy data, straight directly to stroke, it does not work at all, right? But we think it's still worth investigating because when you think in terms of the models, stroke can really be seen as a deviation from this healthy manifold, this healthy representation space, right? So we think that learning this deviation from healthy is actually easier than learning everything from scratch. So this is the fundamental idea that we're trying to pursue here. And a better way to formulate the hypothesis, therefore, are the representations transferable and useful when we start from not random, but some initialized pre-training space from a healthy model. And to do this, there's usually a prerequisite for NLP and vision. This is the same, is that you have to have a robust and generalizable foundation model, right? This pre-training model has to be reasonably good at this out-of-distribution task such that once you fine tune, it's smooth, it's transferable. So if you overfit to one particular subgroup, if it only works in specific distributions, most likely the downstream training will be bad. And one way to measure this is zero shot. So in NLP, it might be a new text, envision a new image. For us, zero shot means the model should work on an unseen subject, right? So someone walks in, we have no data on this person. We deploy the model and it just works. It detects the gesture. All right. So with that said, the first step of our pipeline is to train a zero-shot model in the healthy domain before we can transfer to stroke. And where do we start with that? The best place to start is to get as large of a data set as possible and as diverse as possible. So we're using the thalamic myo as the EMG sensor, which is an 8-channel, 200 Hz sensor meant to be placed on the forearm, as you saw earlier in the video. It is one of the oldest sensors. It was released in 2016. It's been 10 years now. It's still kind of the best sensor out there for general purpose EMG. But the biggest benefit with using thalamic myo is that we get a lot of data set from other labs, other people, other open source data sets that's accumulated throughout the years. And specifically, we use 5 data sets that I'm listing on the right. I won't go into too much detail, but together they provide us with over 650 subjects and over 150 hours of worth of EMG data, which is quite a lot in EMG. So typically, when people train an EMG gesture model, what they do is they take a window of EMG signal, a short window, feed it to a model, and then the model predicts a gesture for this window, right? And we use a window as the input because a single time step of EMG doesn't really mean anything. You really have to look at the neighboring time steps to contextualize it. So a window input, single label output. Now, this creates a problem because if I can show you an example here, if this is my input signal, this is the window, the person might start with relax and then goes into an open state. And if you try to label this with a single label, do you say this is relaxed or is this open, right? It's very ambiguous. So you might say, I can do this in many different ways. I can use the last time step. I can take the average. I can use the most common, the mode. I can, do a bunch of other things. But all of these causes ambiguity and impreciseness, but also they cause potentially latency, which is what we care a lot about when we want to, design human-robot interactions, and when we design wearable robotics. It has to be responsive, it has to be fast. So this will work, but it's not ideal. So therefore, we make this one simple change, which is that instead of predicting a single label, we're predicting essentially a dense sequence, right? And it's as dense as the number of times that we have in the window. So this is very similar to image segmentation, where you provide a label for every pixel. We're labeling every single time step. So if it's 600 time steps in the input, 600 predictions will be made for each time step. So this allows us to learn on a much finer scale and reduce or remove this ambiguity problem altogether. But there's one more challenge when we do this in the dense segmentation approach, which is that EMG is very non-stationary. So as I showed you earlier, it can change drastically. And it really responds to change in the underlying intent, right? So it's not like your typical time series, such as weather data or electricity usage data, which are more periodic. So EMG is really non-stationary. And if you open your hand, it reflects on the EMG. And we never know when the person has opened or closed their hands. So if you think about the example on the left here, the same open label is applied to the start of the gesture, the onset of the gesture, right? The middle of the gesture, and also the steady state sustained gesture, right? And these are very different distributions. So we really need to contextualize this and ground the EMG features in the underlying intent. And the way we do that is that we take some inspiration from multimodal language models. And this one I'm showing here is called NextGPT. So these models are called any-to-any in the sense that they take any set of inputs and give you any set of output, and that they ground the representations across modalities with by feeding them and using cross-attention. So we're asking, can we do the same thing here? Can we put EMG and gesture both as input and get some output, right? So what is the output? In this case, we're formulating this as a bird-style mask modeling problem, where we mask different parts of the input and ask the model to reconstruct the mask portions. So this turns the supervised problem into a denoising problem, almost. And more specifically, how we do this is that we take the EMG and the gesture, the dense gesture sequence as the input, and we form this multi-model sequence by concatenating the two modalities. And we add positional encoding, modality encodings, and we feed it into a encoder, a transformer specifically. And from here, we split the output into the sequence into two branches, the EMG branch and the intent branch. And we compute MSE loss and cross entropy loss on both of them, or on each of them, respectively. Okay, so we have a model. We have this masking setup. But exactly how do we mask actually matters a lot, because if you think about EMG, it's fairly easy to interpolate the mask positions if you have the surrounding information, right? If you have the immediate before and after, most likely the one in the middle is not going to go random. It's a continuous signal. And intent is the same thing. If I'm very unlikely to open and close my hand 200 times per second. So if you have the immediate before and after, it's easy to infer the intent. So if we train it with random mask, it doesn't really help with learning a strong feature space. So therefore, we go with the span masking approach, which is also very common in language models. And this just helps us to get a better representation space. But one other thing that masking allows us to do is that it allows us to create different pre-training tasks using the same multi-model sequence, but choosing where to mask and where not to mask. So the three training tasks we have in our model is from top to bottom. The first one, intent mask, where we actually give the EMG, we fully unmask the EMG, and we only mask the intent section, right? And this essentially tells the model to predict the intent given EMG, very straightforward. But the second case is more interesting, and the third case, where the second case, EMG mask, the EMG is being masked, but the intent is not being masked. So this is almost like a generative model approach, where you're asked to generate the corresponding EMG given the intent that you're seeing. Right, so very generative flavor. And last but not least, we have this time-aligned mask. So this is where we mask the temporal aligned segments of EMG and intent. And the model really, at this point, has to reconstruct both from the surrounding intent. And these three approaches together really encourage contextualized embedding of the EMG and the intent to help us better learn this robust feature space that will be used for downstream fine-tuning tasks. And now, if you notice, the first case where intent is masked and EMG is given is actually the inference time setup, right? So at inference time, you only have the EMG, you're not giving the intent. In fact, at inference time, the entire intent segment is fully masked, right? So I should really, these should all be masked, right? This entire segment should be masked out. So I just told you earlier that, dense modeling is good, it's helpful. How do we actually turn this, this format of model output into our control command? So let's take a look at one of the signals here. This is EMG sample at 200 Hertz. Okay, cool. Yeah, sample at 200 Hertz. And I will say that we can actually run inference at 200 Hertz, but we do not do that. We actually run it at a much lower frequency to prevent a failure case that's very common only in the online setting, right? So if you do this offline, it's not a problem. But if you think about controlling the device and using this in an online real-time setup, it starts to matter a lot. So what do I mean by that? Let's actually zoom into this sequence here. So on the top, you see the ground truth values of a gesture sequence. So the person starts with the hand relaxed. goes into an opening phase, goes into a closed phase, back to open, and back to relax, so on and so forth, right? And on the bottom, this is our model's prediction. So it predicts relax, it goes to open, goes to close for a split second, comes back to open, so on and so forth, right? So this might not seem like a big problem at first, but if you think about the use case of the device of the orthosis, this is actually very catastrophic, because think about, say, if a person is trying to hold a mug, right, hold a bottle and it's hot water inside, so the hand is closed. And now if your model makes, even for a split second, an open prediction that triggers the device to open, you might drop the mug, you might spill water on yourself, you might hurt yourself, right? So this same logic applies to various different wearable robotic setups, where you really have to follow the intent of the user. I mean, any split second mistake can cost you a lot when you actually deploy the device. So to summarize that aspect, that point, which is that run assistance can be worse than no assistance in some cases, and that we really do not want these flickers to happen if we can. So we need some form of smoothing to do this. And to understand how we control this behavior, let's take a look at an example of our model output, or a sequence of our model output. So say I have this blue bar here, corresponds to the dense predictions over the window for, let's say, 600 time steps of my window size. So one gray bar is one of the prediction, a logic vector, if you will. So I have 600 of them laying right here, right? And we're currently at time step t. So we're trying to make a prediction for t, and this is the most recent window that we observe. Now let's leap into the future a little bit. So let's take a look at the next 50 time step of windows. So because it's in an online streaming setup, each of them have some overlap with one another. And if you think about the case where you're trying to predict the intent at t, and say you open your hand right at the moment where t happened. So all the time step before that is relaxed. So you open your hand at t, and this is the first time you're seeing the opening signal. It's probably very difficult to predict this open, because one time step of EMG, as I said earlier, it doesn't really give you a lot. It will be helpful to look at the EMGs that comes after t to make sure that it is open but it's not noise, right? And EMG, since it captures everything, even if you wave your arm, if you try to open while you're moving your arm, it will be captured. So we have to reject noise, and we have to be stable. So let me make the diagram more complete now. If you look at the windows into the future, they all have predictions overlapping, and they're all dense. So each little gray bar is one prediction. And if we pick a window of that we look in the future small enough such that the intent do not change within this window, then we can argue that the prediction for the same timestamp from these later windows, like window 50, window 40, window 30. So the predictions for t at these later windows, given that it's contextualized, might be better than the prediction for t at this very first window when we first saw t, right? So this means that if the intent does not change, all of these area, this little red-green area to the right of t, is helpful in predicting the intent at t. Now you might be saying, oh, this is the big assumption to make. How is it valid, right? So this is valid only under the assumption that this window, this look-ahead period, is small enough, right? And unless you're trying to break the Guinness World Record, or this person tries to clap their hand 1,000 times in 1 minute, you are very unlikely to open and close your hand 200 times per second. Maybe you open and close 5 times, 7 times, 10 times at most. You can try right now. It's very hard. I tried. So unless you're trying to break the world record, this is a reasonable assumption as long as the look ahead is small enough. So what do we do if intent does not change within this little future look ahead window? Is that we just take the average of all the logits, and presumably some logits will be better than others, and we hope that on average this will give you the correct prediction. And one other thing we employ is that we hold the prediction once we have it for t, we hold it for the next 20 time steps or a very short horizon into the future, such that first it improves stability. Second is that you don't have to do inference 200 times per second. It's more compute efficient. And these two tricks altogether really reduces your flickering to a bare minimum and allows you to use the device online in real time very stably. Okay, so before we get into the results, I want to briefly talk about the metric we use to evaluate the models. And this is important because, as I just described, the inference behavior is actually quite different than the offline behaviors, right? So there are more to consider when you do online inference and when you use a device in an online setting. So we know the good behaviors. Can we quantify them such that we can evaluate them offline and compare across different models? So the way we come up with measuring this is that we divide every single time step, or we put every single time step into one of two buckets. It can be either in the reaction buffer, which is blue regions you see on the plot, and the maintenance period, which is the red regions you see on the plot. So the reaction buffers are centered around a gesture transition where you go from relaxed to open. And the maintenance period is anything that comes after the reaction buffer up until the next reaction buffer, right? So in this way, no matter what signal you give me, it can be arbitrary in length. It can have arbitrary transitions to different classes. I can give you this mapping of reaction buffer and maintenance period. And now we can evaluate the performance of our model, the online performance of our model using this kind of event or unit-based approach, where it is only a good prediction if it is fast, meaning that it lies within this reaction buffer here, and that once it transitions, it is very stable after that. It does not make wrong predictions, right? So there's no flickers. So some examples of this you can see on the right, which is that you see the ground truths on the very top. You see the correct prediction on the second row, and you see wrong prediction on the third row because there was no transition in this blue buffer. And lastly, you see this incorrect prediction on the fourth row because there's a close prediction where it should have opened in the maintenance period, right? So we're measuring our model. We use this using this metric so that whatever we do offline is meaningful and realistic performance when we transfer to the online setting. So using this metric, what does the result look like? So this is results evaluated on the EMG EPN 612 dataset. This is the largest MIO dataset, open source dataset out there. It has 612 stands for 612 participants, and half of that is a test dataset. So the results you're seeing are test accuracies on this 306 people that's held off from training. And the first thing that you will see is that raw accuracy, or how people usually report accuracy with EMG in EMG, is very different from transition, right? Which is our accuracy, the one I just showed you. So raw accuracy actually kind of inflates your real-time behaviors by quite a lot. And this is the same for all models. And across the models that we test and the baselines in literature currently, we're the best state-of-the-art gesture recognition model out there. And if you compare our model with the closest competitor, which is at TCN, you see here, we're actually much faster than at TCN. So we have lower latency, and this is latency in millisecond, the average and the median latency. So we're not only more accurate, but we're also faster. But this prediction does not, this comparison cannot end here because EPN is actually a very standardized data set, so that the data collected in the EPN data set is in the same position. It does not change much in distribution. But we care about real-time online usage with different postures, stuff like that. So we collected our own data set called the ROM EMG, which I mentioned earlier that we just part of. And this data set essentially contains more different postures, different transitions across non-relaxed gestures and various other distribution shifts, and it's on average much lower in accuracy. But I think it highlights the non-stationary nature of EMG and that online and offline has this big gap. And still, we're the best performing models across many different baselines. And what this looks like in practice is showing here. So in this video, you have 4 unseen subjects, not part of the training set, and they're asked to try open and closing gestures, control this hand orthosis right here. You can see the signal and the predictions on the top left of each video. And we're showing you that in different postures, this model works. And also that in a second, you will see people trying to wave their arms very randomly. So that we're trying to show that it rejects noise. So it rejects different gestures. And you will see that, it's not perfect. It makes mistakes. But generally, it works reasonable enough on unseen subjects, healthy subjects. And you can find the full video online, of course, so if you're interested. But yeah, any questions so far? I want to take a pause before I go further. Stroke. Okay, no question, then I will keep going. Okay, so you have this healthy pre-trained model. We built it. It kind of works. It's not perfect. It's reasonable. Now let's come back to the problem we said earlier, which is the few shot stroke adaptation from healthy. How do we do that? So we take the healthy pre-trained weights. We take a small stroke data set, which I will explain in a second. And we try several different fine-tuning approaches, right? There's your typical full fine-tuning. There's only tune the classification head, and there's LoRa. And we compare these against 2 baselines, one it being the healthy model directly deployed to the stroke domain, right, without any fine-tuning. So, and it doesn't work, as we know, but it offers us kind of a baseline comparison for how different the stroke and healthy models are. And then we compare against the baseline of a stroke-only training where it's initialized from scratch, from not from healthy pre-trained weights. And this is usually typically how people do stroke EMG in literature, where it's only stroke domain data that's being used. So our goal is to see if using this pre-trained checkpoint, pre-trained weights from healthy is actually better for stroke generalization. And the data set we have, it's also a slightly out of distribution data set because we want to test more realistic use cases under fatigue, under different postures, and under sensor placement shift. So these are the visuals I showed you earlier. These are actually our stroke test set. So it's not enough to be accurate in this one fixed position. You really have to be accurate when the person is moving their arms and at different postures and trying to use the device, and when the sensor is not placed in the same position, right? Which happens because you take off the sensor one day, you put it on tomorrow, it's almost never the same position. So we're trying to see if the generalizability is usable. It's useful in the out of distribution settings in our case. So this is what the results look like. We have raw accuracy on the left and transition on the right. So same story, raw is higher than transition. The leftmost green bar is your zero shot healthy model. The yellow bar is your stroke only models. And what we see is that regardless of what fine-tuning method you use, you can LoRa, you can use full fine-tuning. But regardless, our model, our pipeline from training from healthy is better, consistently better than training solely from scratch, which means that it's useful. And if I may interpret this a little bit, this actually, the performance gain actually corresponds to how impaired you are as a stroke subject. So with S3, you see on the very right, S3 is our most functioning subject, and no wonder you get the highest accuracy. Whereas S1 is our most impaired subject, and you have the lowest accuracy. So I think the the story here is that if you're closer to healthy, healthy pre-training will help you more. And if you're more impaired, you might need more data or some other methods to improve your performance. But it's still better than if you train only from stroke. And one other behavior we see is that if you consider the amount of samples you use, right? The extreme few shot setting where you only have one sample or 4 samples, 8 samples. So at one single sample, if you fine tune from healthy, it actually improves your performance by quite a bit, almost doubles than if you train from scratch. So yeah, which goes to say that this pre-trained weights are from healthy, which might have a different distribution than stroke, actually helps a lot with stroke adaptation. And on stroke, what it looks like is as follows. So you can see in the video, the person, let me actually pause this for a second. So the person starts in this resting state. The person is asked to open his or her hand. And I want to pause right here. So this is at most how much the person will open his or her hand. And this is what I mean by spasticity and stiffness and this clenched fist position that's commonly seen in stroke. So the person, despite keep on trying, she's not going to open her hand because that's how much it will go. But the EMG sensing is on so that the intent is being detected. And if I continue playing this, you will see that the orthosis gets engaged and the person opens. It helps the person to open her. And I think we have one more repetition here in the video. Let that play. Okay. Yeah, so and that takes me to the end of my talk. A few takeaways I want to share. First is that healthy data can be useful in the impaired domain. This is true for EMG, as we showed. Might or may not be true for other, ECG, EEG, but I think it's worth attempting because of how limited the data is in, biosignals in general. And second point is that online-offline gap is very significant. This is not only, it's not only talking about the inference versus, the offline setups, but also, how you evaluate your model. Is your evaluation metric actually reflective of online usage? And also, given that it's a wearable device, is it runnable on a on a microcontroller chip or on some edge devices, for example, right? So in our case, our model can actually only be run on a GPU. So we need to do some form of distillation or other tricks to make it actually run on the device itself. And last but not least, scaling biosignals is very hard. And this is not just because of data collection issues, but also because that the sensing interface is not standardized, right? So there's a lot of EMG sensors out there. Many labs are developing really good sensors, such as high density EMG grid, or fabric EMG sensors with conductive fabrics. And all of these are great, except that when you're trying to train a robust model, you do not have enough data to help support your training, right? So in our case, the EMG armband we use, the Thalmic Myo, we're really sitting on the top of 10 years worth of open source data. And I think that's a big reason of why this method works. And similarly, some of you might know that Meta, the company, recently released wristband for EMG. And they have over 1,000 participants with over 1,000 hours of data. And the results are pretty good. It works quite robustly on healthy. So I do believe that scaling biosignals is very important. We should definitely do that. But without a standardized sensing interface, I think reusing data sets will be very difficult. And with that said, I want to thank my collaborators shown here. Matej is my advisor, and Dr. Stein and Dr. Nelson are our collaborators from the medical campus. Ava, Jinshi, Caitlin, Xinyu, and Lauren, thank you all. And I'll open the floor to any questions. Feel free to.
Question.
Yes.
Yeah, so you're mapping your raw data as the signal to like the open close release signal. Is it like a real time mapping or it's like post processing after you collect all the raw?
Yes. So great point. Yes. So it is yes. Let me go back to this slide. So it runs in real time because the look ahead period is small enough, right? So we actually need to use future data to make predictions about t, right? And how this manifests in practice is that we have a delay, and we have an unavoidable delay because we want to look at future time steps, and we want to look at future time step because looking at this single time step actually does not tell you a lot about EMG. So this, you can think of this as post-processing, but it's done online in real time at the cost of a delay. Now, how much of this delay is acceptable is up to you. Really depends on how often you want to, or how responsive you want the model to be, but also how often human will modulate their gesture changes, right? So as I said earlier, if you try to open a hand, 10 times a second is probably very difficult. So reasonable, ballpark is 5-6 times a second. And if you look ahead, it's small enough such that it's shorter than that. Then you can stay responsive while avoiding delay. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Where are the complications of making the model recognize multiple gestures instead of just opening the palm and closing it at the same time?
Right. Oh, I see. So you're saying that if, say, I'm trying to open my hand while reaching forward, can you predict open and reach forward at the same time?
Yeah.
Is that the question? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's also a great question. So there are actually some works that explores that aspect of things, and I will say that well, I don't have a good answer for this because the signal actually picks up both gestures, right? As I said earlier, if you try to move your arm and you try to open your hand, the signal both signals are in your EMG. And the common approach that others do to solve this is to do some frequency analysis, because some people think that opening is a very short burst, it's very instantaneous, whereas movement is kind of slower. But I think ultimately, if you scale your data collection enough, which I know is hard, I think end-to-end models generally works better for EMG and biosignals in general, just based on how noisy and how non-stationary they are. So if you can get enough data with arm movement and hand open and label these variations, then I think you have a chance at doing good predictions on them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
A question.
Yes, please.
I wonder if it's possible to add an accelerometer to detect if the user is moving their hands and to deal with edge cases and stuff.
Yeah. Yes, great point. And yes, we should definitely have other sensing modalities on this. The Myo armband itself actually has IMU instead, right? But as we know, IMUs are very noisy. If you try to integrate, the drift it's insane. So yes, I think one of the we should integrate more sensors, or accelerometers and other sensing modalities into this. And since you asked this question, I will say that one of our prior works, not by me, but by a former member of the lab, we used EMG and this thing called TrackStar. I'm not sure if you folks are familiar. It's essentially this like electromagnetic tracker for like 6D pulse. And we were able to use that with the EMG to control UR5 arm and to control the end effector with gestures. So yes, I think it is a great point. We should incorporate more sensing modalities. Yes. Any other questions? Okay, if there's no questions, I guess that will be the end of my talk. Thank you guys all for coming. Really appreciate that.
Thank you,
And,
Richard, for being after the talk. And I think we learned a lot from your work.
Yeah, thank you so much. And nice to see everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
All
See
right,
you.
bye.